Welcome, everybody, to tonight's presentation. Tonight, we're going to hear from Andrew Smith of the Rodale Institute. We are the Mid-Atlantic Renewable Energy Association. We're a nonprofit providing educational speakers on topics related to renewable energy and sustainable living. Coming up next month, September 30th, we'll learn about large-scale solar in Pennsylvania, the nexus between energy, land use, and policy. Surprising to me, large-scale solar in Pennsylvania has doubled in capacity in the last 18 months to over 2.7 gigawatts of capacity. That's now 1% of Pennsylvania's total electric generation. That generation, however, occupies about 10,000 acres of land. And recently, the federal government, the current administration, stuck a wrench in that momentum. So, what we hope next month, we hope to learn what is happening with siting, zoning considerations, common concerns over these solar installations, and current proposed legislative and policy initiatives. We're going to hear from one of the leading drivers of Pennsylvania solar, and that is the Penn State extension of the Pennsylvania State University. Then up in October, we switch gears, still a topic on solar, but this will be residential solar. We'll learn about what's new, what's different, and what's green. Presenting will be Ron Celentano. He's a longtime MAREA member, and Ron's been a solar consultant for over 28 years, and he first became involved with solar in the 1970s. So there'll be a lot of knowledge, and we look forward to that. And then for tonight's presentation, Phil.
Hi, I'm really pleased to introduce tonight's speaker, Dr. Andrew Smith. As Chief Scientific Officer, Dr. Andrew Smith oversees the research and farm operations at Rodale Institute, a national, now international organization headquartered in Kutztown, Pennsylvania. He is passionate about growing the organic movement by providing science-based solutions to farmers and facilitating opportunities to expand the number of organic farmers and farmland across the globe. His motive for entering the organic industry was to reduce the use of chemicals for food production that end up in our environment, in our food, and in our bodies. He has over 20 years of experience working in the organic industry as an agronomist, researcher, and farmer. He graduated from Cornell University, where he studied agronomy and crop sciences. Later, he earned a master's degree in protection and integrated pest management from the University of Maryland and a PhD in molecular biology from Drexel University. At Rodale Institute, he has the opportunities to support an amazing group of dedicated people working diligently on many projects to transform the food system and the way we farm to improve the lives and health of all people on the planet. He also continues to live and work on his own organic family farm. Welcome, Dr. Smith.
Thank you, Phil. It's a real pleasure to be here with you and talk about this topic that's near and dear to my heart. So, at Rodale Institute, we're located in Kutztown, Pennsylvania. We have a 400-acre campus, and we do education, research, education, and outreach around organic agriculture. So you might be wondering, why are we concerned about this link between soil health to human health? And really, it starts. Hold on, my slides aren't advancing. Okay, there we go. It really starts with the founding of Rodale Institute. So our founder was J.I. Rodale. He was an industrialist. He was a manufacturer of switches, and found himself in Emmaus, Pennsylvania, during the Great Depression when he was looking for cheaper areas to manufacture than New York City. But he had this idea or concept that he would improve his health and the health of his family by producing healthy food. And he said healthy soil equals healthy food equals healthy people. And you might say, well, where did he get that from? Well, in his inquiry on how to farm, because he wasn't a farmer, he started writing people like Lady Balfour in England, and she had said, the health of soil, plant, animal, and man is one and indivisible. And he was also writing with Sir Albert Howard, who some people call the godfather of organic agriculture. And he said that healthy food grown in fertile soil is the birthright of humanity. And I'd say that the way we're growing food now with our industrialized and intensive food production system, we have basically given away that birthright. And J.I. Rodale saw that coming. He could prognosticate the direction we were going because he saw that we were taking things like nitrogen and tear gas that were made to kill people in World War II, and we were converting them into uh, our agricultural system. And so that really concerned him. He started Organic Farming and Gardening Magazine, which really was a lighthouse publication for the natural food production movement of now and really how that word organic, it's how that word organic got into our vernacular. And in 1946, Eve Balfour started the Soil Association in England. And the next year, J.I. Rodale said, well, we should have something like that in the United States. But I'm going to call mine the Soil and Health Association because he was very focused on how we manage the soil, how we take care of the soil, and how that interacts to improve human health. And now that's what we today call the Rodale Institute. And his son, Bob Rodale, really grew the organic movement. He grew the Rodale Press. He added other magazines like Prevention, Women's Fitness, Men's Fitness, Cycling. He recognized that the health movement and health food movement was a major driver in the growth of the Rodale Press. And he started using this word regenerative to go be beyond, to mean beyond organic. So this is a term that's really become, popularized more recently. And he actually, with seven other people, founded IFOAM, which is the International Federation of the Organic Agriculture Movement. And in 1981, he started the Farming Systems Trial, which I'm going to talk a little bit about today. And that trial really is what informed government policy to be able to have a national organic program and now have actually USDA organic products. Because the federal government basically said in 1980, we have no data to support an organic program. And unless you have a government-supported organic program, there's no research that the government can divert towards or any other resources towards organic agriculture. And also, we wouldn't have what we now have, where we have a certification and a recognized organic label. So those are things that Bob Rodale was very instrumental in. And I'm going to make a case for organic. Part of the reason that the Rodale Institute has said we want to do this work is because we truly believe that when we grow food organically, we improve the soil, we improve the environment, and we actually improve the nutritional quality of the food that we're eating, and that leads to human health, improved human health. But proving that is not that easy. So we've said we need to put more scientific data behind this what we might call the soil to health continuum, in order to not only to help us get healthier, but to help greater adoption of organic agriculture. And what I'm going to talk today, I'm just going to briefly talk about our health. We're not healthy. I mean, we're sick, and by all measures, we're getting sicker in the United States. We have to remember, or at least recognize, the use of chemicals in our agriculture today. Rachel Carson wrote Silent Spring, and we really started an environmental movement in the 60s and 70s that was revolved mostly around reducing or eliminating chemicals in the environment. But now climate change has come, and we've really diverted our intention, environmental groups especially, and the general population away from the dangers of chemicals and have focused more on climate change. And it's my personal opinion that chemicals in the environment, and largely due to agriculture, is a greater crisis than climate change. I'm going to talk a little bit about the nutritional decline of food and some of the factors, and then I'm going to jump into our current research. And so this is actually old data now, 10 years plus old. And so it's probably greater than this, but this report shows that more than 60% of Americans have one or more chronic disease, and 12% of U.S. adults had five or more chronic conditions. So to me, this is astounding. It's only getting worse. And what was really, kind of, kind of, I don't know, made me take notice last week was this very new report that came out in JAMA that measured the increase of chronic disease amongst our children since 2011, and also looked at chronic disease compared to other developed countries like Europe. And it's pretty clear that the United States has greater incidence of chronic disease than many parts of the world, and that it continues to grow. This time point between 2011 and 2023, a large part of the growth in chronic conditions can be attributed to the use of smartphones and the rise of depression and other social disorders. But we still see a significant increase in what I would call food-related conditions or disorders like autism, obesity, and metabolic disorder. And these were all ones that had significant increases. And then this is sperm count. Basically since we've been looking at it, we've seen the decline in sperm count, and it only looks like that's accelerating. But what you don't see here on this graph is sperm abnormalities and other genitalia deformities that are also on the rise. So there's a real concern whether we'll even be able to procreate in the future. And I know when I started, as Philip read, my concern for chemicals in the environment largely came from looking at cancer rates and trying to scratch in our heads at how could cancer have risen this much over, let's say, 100 years. But it looks like cancer rates continue to be on the rise. It's hard to believe that they can even keep going up, but they are. So all of our modern medicine is not really, doesn't seem to be making us healthier. And this is one that really blows my mind. This is increased rates of autism. And if you're paying attention, a government report that came out attributed to the rise in autism partly to improved reporting and heritability. And I think that's preposterous. You can't look at this graph and not understand that there's a clear signal that's telling us there's something wrong with the chemicals that we use in our environment, chemicals that we use in agriculture, and what ends up in our food and in our bodies. And that doesn't play a significant role in this data that we're looking at. And since I've been, paying attention for the last 20, 25 years or so, I probably could have gone on for an hour and shown you all the different increases in different diseases and disorders. And then it very clearly looks like we have similar rises in uses of pesticides, things like fungicides, insecticides, herbicides for our agriculture. It looked like it was going to peak around 95, 97. We started to have some decline. This was largely due to genetically modified crops that came onto the market that reduced the need for insecticides. But I'm going to show you some data that around 2005, there was really a major inflection point. And now, to our best estimates, we're over 1.2 billion pounds of active ingredient of insecticides, or I'm sorry, all pesticides applied in the United States. And that's probably a bad number. It's probably significantly higher than that. And so I'm going to show you a few figures. Here's one of the reasons. So in around 1996, 1997, herbicide tolerant genetically modified crops came onto the market. So these are things like corn, soybean, and cotton that can tolerate the use of glyphosate. Glyphosate is the active ingredient in Roundup. So it's an herbicide. And so we can spray these crops multiple times now to control weeds. It's very effective against controlling weeds. But you can see what's happened, the massive amount or increase in glyphosate use in the country. Some estimates have it at a 15-time increase. That's not 15%, but that's 15 times greater use of glyphosate. So there was a lot of debate at that time when genetically modified crops came on and whether they were safe to eat. And a lot of that got pushed under the rug, but I would just say they're not really safe to plant or grow because they lead to increased herbicide use. And this is where we are. This is a study that came out from the U.S. Geological Survey that shows that over 70% of all water samples in the United States have glyphosate or its derivative AMPA. So as glyphosate breaks down, it turns into AMPA. And they sampled across the entire country, and I even put their rain under the precipitation. So over 70% of the samples they collected in rain had glyphosate or AMPA. So even if you live in maybe an urban area and you say, well, they're not really using a lot of chemicals here, or I live in an area where there's not high agriculture, you can still basically it's raining, could be raining on us. And quite honestly, we're still using glyphosate extensively in things like parks and walkways and urban settings as well. So you can't really escape it, even if you don't live near agriculture. And here's a survey uh, of of citizens across the United States that showed that over 80% of the survey participants, which really means that over 80% of all Americans are walking around with glyphosate in their bodies all day, every day. And the way the study was conducted, some people had fasted, like if you had gone in the morning to give a sample and you had not eaten for, let's say, 6 to 8 hours. And so the study clearly showed that fasting or prolonged periods of time without eating showed a decline in the levels of glyphosate in the body. So that what that tells us is that we're getting it from our food. So we're probably getting some from the environment, but we're also getting it from the food we eat. This is showing the rise of neonicotinoid insecticides. So neonicotinoids are a class of insecticides that are largely banned in Europe. They're largely banned because they have shown to be, very detrimental to honeybees and insect populations. And this has led to there's studies showing that, you have declines in insect populations, or you have insects that have accumulations of neonicotinoids in them, leading to declines in bird and bat populations that are critical natural natural enemies or natural pest control measures. And all of studies that we've seen, and this graph is from John Tucker and his group at Penn State. John has done several studies to show that there's no economic benefit, and really, actually, these pesticides cause ecological disruption. In some cases, makes pest outbreaks even worse. And then there's other studies that basically show across the whole country that there's no economic benefit from using these insecticides, yet they're basically just about every corn and soybean seed planted across the country are coated with neonicotinoid insecticides, which is causing this tremendous rise. But they're highly water soluble, which is why they move to other landscapes and other plants and how they impact honeybees and insects. And this gets to our rise in toxicity. So two things have happened around 2004, 2005. The increased use of neonicotinoids, which are more toxic than other insecticides. And I showed the rise in glyphosate or Roundup and what, for a short period of time, because glyphosate is less toxic than some of other herbicides, our total toxicity load dropped. But around 2005, we saw an inflection point where, one, because weeds were becoming tolerant to glyphosate, or resistant, meaning glyphosate didn't kill them. So the two things that happened was that farmers increased their rates of glyphosate, and they used other chemicals like paraquat, 2,4-D, atrazine, several herbicides that are banned in many other countries like Europe, even China and Brazil. And so we're now putting more chemicals that are more toxic into the environment. And this was a study that looked at it was about 300 participants. So it wasn't a huge study, but 99% of them had at least one neonic. So neonic is a kind of common term for neonicotinoid insecticides. And 84 of them had 2 to 6 different neonics in their spinal column fluid. So this is highly concerning. And these were not people working in agricultural regions. So their exposure was not necessarily high. And so studies, mouse studies link this to Parkinson's disease. And there's other studies that are definitely showing poor health. And I'm not I originally showed this slide to a group of doctors, so it probably meant a lot more to them. I can't say that I'm an expert, but again, you see autism here as neonicotinoids playing a contributing factor potentially for autism. And I showed this set of slides also to farmers in the Midwest, and they really it kind of piqued they kind of like piqued their interest because, like I said, these neonicotinoid insecticides are coated on just about every seed that these farmers are putting into their planters. But unlike, they don't think of them as chemicals like what they put into a sprayer. So they're generally not wearing gloves and protective equipment. And so these farmers realize that they have much higher exposure to these insecticides than the general public, because they're literally handling bags of seed. And when I talk bags of seed, I mean people are like tractor trailer loads of seed is what the typical farmer would be planting in the Midwest. So it's not like a small bag in your garden. So there can be considerable exposure to our farming population. And this is one study, but just about every study that I ever looked at, which looked at a conversion to organic diet, where we have a population that eats their normal diet and then they're put on for a short period of time, usually 6 or 7 days, because that's at about the time you can ask someone to stay on a specific diet, especially children that are in this study. And then they come off that diet to basically show that when people are on an organic diet, their exposure to these chemicals and pesticides is much lower, in some cases you know, almost none or negligible. So all these studies clearly show that eating an organic diet is going to provide less exposure and risk to the pesticides that we're using in agriculture. And as we move towards nutrient density or nutritional quality or concentrations of nutrients in our food, you know, I just want to kind of put this idea of hidden hunger, where, this is especially true in the United States where we're overfed but undernourished. So, and it's just kind of an interplay here, especially in metabolic disorder or being overweight or obese. So 78% of Americans are either overweight or obese. And you can see based on these numbers here, this is the percentage of the population that are below the estimated average requirement based on their body weight for these different nutrients. So it's kind of a chicken or an egg. If you may increase obesity, and overweight may increase from a poor diet that has low in nutrients. But if you're eating a diet that is low in nutritional quality, you are not satiated, and therefore you might be overeating because you're not getting sufficient nutrients. So it's hard to pinpoint what that causes, but there's an interplay here between being overweight or obesity and the fact that we have hidden hunger, which basically means we have met our caloric needs, but we're not meeting our nutritional needs. And I'm going to talk a little bit about why that might be true. So around the turn of the century, there was several different studies that looked at databases both in the UK and the United States, and started to recognize. So I kind of put all that data together here. But over like a 50 to 70 year period, they started to recognize that there was declines in the concentration of nutrients in our food. So things like calcium, copper, iron, magnesium, riboflavin, potassium, especially protein, and some critical essential amino acids, especially in grain. And the other thing that was recognized was that starch or calories were increasing, especially in our grains, and water increased, especially in our vegetables. So we're getting bigger and heavier vegetables, but it doesn't mean that we have an increase in the nutritional value. And mostly because farmers get paid by the weight of vegetables, not the nutritional value. I included this here for several reasons. One, if we were talking about the environment, this is a major concern, the use of nitrogen and other fertilizers in agriculture. So we have a massive loading of nitrogen going in around our entire country. And we're not immune to it if we're in the Lehigh Valley. So you can see there, Berks County, Lancaster County, and some areas in southeastern Pennsylvania where there's heavy agricultural production. And why this is of concern, well, one, because we have diseases like blue baby syndrome, where basically babies are born starved of oxygen because of high nitrogen levels during the fetal development. Um, it's also because of dilution, the dilution effect. And what that is basically is as we increase the yields of crops, largely through the use of fertilizers, but also I'm going to talk about crop breeding. What we notice is you tend to dilute or reduce the amount of nutrients. So then the nutrients that are extracted from the soil are then diluted or spread throughout those crops, and that's something that we've definitely seen over the last 50 to 70 years. And the other reason of concern is that, especially in the Midwest, our the water quality systems, the systems, especially in urban or population centers, have to remove this nitrogen. It's a human health concern, so they remove it. But people who have private wells might be contaminated and have no method to remove this from their well. So it is major concern where they even put out notices in the Midwest to say, basically don't get pregnant during these time periods because there's major risk, which is really not something we should, it just points that we're going in the wrong direction. But as we talk about organic agriculture at Rodale, we've shown that organic agriculture can be a solution. So this is data from our long-term farming systems trial, which I'm going to talk about in a little bit here, where we have water catchment devices called lysimeters underneath some of the plots, and we can pump that water up and measure nitrogen and phosphorus and chemicals. And we've clearly shown that the levels are higher under the conventionally managed plots or systems compared to the organic systems. So a switch to organic can mitigate that risk. But one of the biggest reasons we know why there's been a decline in nutritional quality has been through breeding or crop breeding. So to me, this is a great example. This is the Rothamsted broadblock wheat trial. This is a long-term trial, longer than our farming systems trial. It goes back, you can see here, started in 1840. And so from 1840 to 1960, there was virtually no change in nutritional levels of the minerals that they were measuring. And then in 1960, we started to see this tremendous increase in yield, an increase in the harvest index. The harvest index is the ratio of grain weight to total plant weight. And that's happening because if you look in the picture, the development of semi-dwarf wheat, and this was largely, Norman Borlaug, who was famous. He got the Nobel Prize for developing, well, he worked in corn and wheat and for breeding. And this largely allowed us to grow greater yields of grains globally, which led to declines in hunger. But as we inspected further, we found that while it reduced hunger, it caused a rise in hidden hunger. And the other thing that is not always really talked about, but I just showed nitrogen. And typically, before the onset of industrialized agriculture and the availability of synthetic nitrogen, farmers had to grow pulse crops. These are things like beans and lentils, in order to make sure you maintain the nitrogen fertility. So the other thing that happened globally is we moved away from pulse crops and grew a much more greater proportion of cereal crops, which again increased caloric intake, but was highly damaging, especially to developing countries that relied on those pulse crops for their protein. sources. If they didn't have a good source of animal protein, and like you're going to see, we had declining protein levels in our cereal grains. So that was also a major part of famine that occurred as a rise of this the Green Revolution, really. But you can see not only did we had an increase in yields, but we had a decline in things like zinc and iron and magnesium and copper. And this may be attributed to the dilution effect, which I mentioned earlier. This is a study that took maize varieties that were released. I think this was Pioneer C that did this study, and they were released between 1920 and 2000, so over an 80-year period. And then they grew them out in several different farms under the same management conditions, so same fertilizer, same soil, and found that over time the varieties had lower protein levels but increases in starch. So what I had already shown previously. And then here's broccoli. 1950, you got about 12.9 milligrams per gram. Today, you're getting somewhere between 3.4 to 4.4 milligrams per gram if you go to the store and pick these up. So yeah, you'd have to eat 3 or 4 times the amount of broccoli to get the same level of calcium that you used to. And here's one of the reasons, we're breeding not only for yield, but we're breeding to be able to be perfectly round, to look perfect. In this case, these tomatoes are grown in Florida. They're going to get put on a tractor trailer. They're going to arrive in probably like New York City or the East Coast population centers. They're going to get gassed with ethylene, so they ripen, and then they're going to be sold. And we're literally breeding for that type of system, not for flavor and not for nutritional value. There are some programs that are working on that, but it's few. And here's one that's probably been more recent as we've had a greater focus on climate change. So what you're seeing here in the foreground is a system. This is out in the open field. I believe this is probably wheat that we're looking at, but that apparatus is controlling the carbon dioxide level, and can control it at different levels. And then just beyond it, where it's still green, are ambient, so the current carbon dioxide levels. So we can grow crops at different atmospheric carbon dioxide levels and look at the nutritional quality. And what we're finding for the most part is that our nutritional quality declines as carbon dioxide in the environment or in the atmosphere increases. So on the left, what you're basically seeing is the enriched CO2 level on the y-axis and the ambient, that's what the A and the E are before carbon dioxide at the ambient level. So the midpoint line is basically saying that if is below um, anything is below this line, that means that um, the we have. I'm trying to think about how I described it earlier. Basically, it means that anything below that line means that the as the the level of protein in the grain will be lower as in elevated CO2 levels than it would be in the current ambient CO2 levels. And then we look over here, and that has a compilation of separate studies, and most of our major food crops estimate a decline in protein. The C4 grains like corn and soybean, they may actually increase in protein because they're able to utilize nitrogen more efficiently in a warmer environment. And here's rice, which has been one of the most studied and is, a major staple for globally. And several studies have found declines in protein, iron, zinc, and the B vitamins. But potentially vitamin E levels could be elevated. And this has to do with a B vitamin has nitrogen as a component and its ability to simulate nitrogen in a warmer and higher carbon dioxide environment. So this gets us to this question of the link between soil health and nutritional quality and human health. And so when we look globally, the UN Food and Agriculture Organization does reports periodically of the health of soil around the world. And as we look from report to report, we basically see continuous degradation or decline in the health of the soils globally. This statement of only 60 years of farming left was a little bit of an inflation of the situation. But in certain areas of the world, um, it's not. There probably are 50 to 60 years of farming left. But in areas like the United States, where we invest in the health of our soil, we have NRCS, the Natural Resource Conservation Service, where we farmers can get funding to put conservation practices on their farm. In places like Europe and developed countries, we tend to see that the degradation is slower, but it's not reversed. It's just slower. Um, so when we look at studies, especially the studies we've done at Rodale Institute, we actually see that we've been able to not only slow that decline, we've actually been able to reverse soil health or regenerate soil health, as uh, Bob Rodale would have said, and improve, this natural resource. So if that's true, we might think that, well, then organic agriculture must improve the nutritional quality of the food if there is this link between soil health and nutritional concentrations in food. And so we sought out in 2016 to really an initiative. We began our vegetable systems trial, which I'm going to talk a little bit about. But before that really got off the ground and got started, we said, well, wait, we have the farming systems trial. This is a side-by-side comparison of organic and conventional. We can start to understand, the dynamics here. And what I'll show you now is a compilation of or a meta-analysis of the literature of in 2014. But I would say that even in 2014, there was still insufficient scientific evidence or not enough research to be able to really say that organic food is healthier than conventional food. So here I'll show you where we are just before we started the vegetable systems trial. This study showed, as we would have expected, 4 times higher pesticide residues in conventional crops. There was higher cadmium, so this is a heavy metal. So higher cadmium, nitrate, and nitrate levels in conventional cereals. Nitrate is typically thought of as being beneficial. Things like spinach and beets have higher levels of nitrate, but nitrite is negative and not considered beneficial for human health. The organic cereals tended to have lower protein, lower amino acids, as well as fiber. And a lot of this is because organic systems tend to be lower nitrogen. So we're not putting on synthetic nitrogen that is readily available. We're utilizing cover crops and compost, which allows nitrogen to become available slower to the plant. But the organic crops have higher total antioxidant activity. And this has been an area of interest of ours to really look at these these bioactive compounds or phytonutrients that we know are in plants. These are, really micronutrients that probably don't get their due. They're not on the back of most food labels. But as we increase medical research, we're starting to understand the importance of many of these different bioactive compounds. And so we first started with our farming systems trial. Here's a photo of the farming system trial in 2021. This is a randomized replicated trial with 72 different plots. And now, it started with 3, but now we have 8 different farming systems. And Dr. Saurav Das, who I believe might be on the call, is the director of the farming systems trial. Um, so we have 3 main systems that we started with in 1981. This is an organic manure system that basically replicates a farm that might have livestock and manure that can be recycled through, we compost the manure and recycle this back as a source of fertility. The organic legume system is a very low input where we've virtually never put any fertilizer down, and we're relying on plant-based fertilizers like clover and vetch as sources of nitrogen and fertility for the crops. And then the conventional system, which is basically the standard practices that are typical across grain production in most of the United States. And we do over time, we make changes as technology changes, as innovations occur. So one example of those is in 2008, we recognized the rise of or increase of no-till agriculture. And so in the conventional system, we added genetically modified herbicide tolerant corn and soybeans, and we have continuous no-till, and that's basically achieved through multiple sprays, usually three applications of herbicides in the corn and soybeans, and then an application. Well, and that's in that system. We're only growing corn and soybeans, and then I'm going to show you in the next slide how we manage the organic no-till. But then in 2015, we added what I'll call a more diversified conventional. So we added wheat in the crop rotation, and we added a cereal rye cover crop, recognizing that that was a direction that farmers were moving across the United States to have more, especially cover crops. These are crops that are planted, not intended to be harvested, but intended to cover the soil for a period of time. Often, in the mid-Atlantic, it's basically planting cereal rye so that it can scavenge for nitrogen and keep it from getting into water sources, and then keep a cover on the soil. So how we do this in organic, it's not complete no-till, but we basically grow a winter annual. So today, I believe we planted hairy vetch on the farm in Kutztown, and that those fields will get no-till planted to corn next year. And the next few weeks, we'll plant cereal rye, which is the picture we show here. And then we follow cereal rye in the spring with soybeans. And what we do is we use a roller crimper, which you can see is on the front of the tractor. And we roll and crimp, and the goal is to completely kill that rye and then plant the soybean directly into it behind it. So we leave this weed suppressing mulch on the surface and plant and use no-till planters to plant right into it. So that's how we're accomplishing no-till. And it's a major area of research for Rodale, especially managing weeds that might emerge during the season. And so anyway, so that's how we're managing the no-till in the organic. And you can see a picture of one of our research trials where we're comparing the organic to tilled soil. And this is how we're accomplishing no-till in the conventional. So on the left are the pesticides. These are mostly herbicides that we're using for our no-till system. And a more recent study that looked at cancer rates as well as pesticide use by county across the country showed a strong association between herbicide or pesticide use patterns, which are basically telling us that depending on what crop we use, that dictates what chemicals we're using, and that actually associates with what cancers are in the areas. And this association is as strong, or in some cases stronger, than the association between smoking and lung cancer. So it isn't just that, this is kind of, it's a correlational study, not a causational study. But the evidence is pretty strong that these chemicals are linked to these different cancers. And this is our list of chemicals in the farming systems trial. And so I'm really just showing you here that all of our data for the last 40, 45 years is showing that the organic systems have healthier soil. I could show you a lot of different metrics, but we now are routinely taking 1 meter deep soil cores, and we're seeing as we go deeper in the soil, we see increased levels of carbon. So the first graph on the left, we have on the left bar graph is conventional, then the organic legume, and then the organic manure. The organic systems are higher at the 0 to 10 centimeters But as we go deeper, that gets that gets even more drastic. So we're storing more carbon deeper in the organic soils. Wet aggregate stability, that's a measurement of the structure of the soil or the ability to stay together during when we're wet or during rainfall. So we're basically putting soil in a wet in water while it's agitated, and then measuring the amount of aggregates that break apart at different sizes. Um, and we're tilling more in the organic. And most soil scientists would say, well, as you till more, your aggregate stability is going to go down or your soil structure is going to get worse. But we're actually finding, largely because we have increased carbon in the soil, that as we go deeper in the soil, in the organic soils, we actually continue to maintain improved aggregate stability or soil structure over the conventional. And if we look, we've looked at these are just some data points, but we've also looked at different types of carbon. The first one we call that active carbon, microbial biomass carbon, the amount of carbon that's in the microbes in the soil, water extractable carbon. And what we're finding is that most of these differences are are based on the system. So organic versus conventional, and to a much lesser extent, tillage. Um, and then we've also more recently published data on the soil microbiomes, and we can tell you that the soil microbiomes are completely different. So the management practices are causing a completely different set of microbes in these soils. So the soils are different. Soils are healthier in the organic. Here's physical structures, so compaction. The first one on the left is compaction. So it's the depth to 300 psi. So meaning the deeper it is, the less compacted or the deeper we can go before our instrument measures the critical psi's. So this is essentially the root zone. So the organically managed soils have a deeper root zone. And then the other one is water infiltration rate. So this is the rate at which water infiltrates into the soil. And I don't want to go too much into the way we measure it, but we're basically showing in some cases, and we have new data that was more intensive sampling that is showing infiltration rate that is consistently double what the conventional system is. So we have healthier soils in the organic. Just wanted to point that out. So now we said, well, let's start to look at nutritional concentrations. Um, we, 2008 is when we started the uh, no-till in the farming systems trial. And we had been sending off all of the grain samples to Cornell for their nutrient analysis. And this is basically for feed analysis. So to measure it to see whether it's, for feeding cattle and other livestock, it's suitability. So we said, well, we could take a look at that data, see what it says. And so the highlights from this are that the protein levels in the organic corn and the manure system were higher than the other systems. The conventional wheat had the highest protein, and the organic legumes, soybeans, had the highest protein in the soybeans. The magnesium was higher in the corn and the manure system, but potassium, magnesium, phosphorus, and sulfur were higher in the conventional wheat. Um, we don't show anything in tillage because tillage had no impact on this data. So we look at this and it's a little messy. It's not a slam dunk to say, oh, organic or conventional is healthier, right? It's a little bit all over the board. So we started to dig a little bit deeper. This is the corn that was from 2020, and we started to do deeper measurement than just those minerals or some of those nutrients that were sent off to Cornell. Um, One thing is that we tend to have equal yields. So over the history of the farming systems trial, the corn yields between the organic and conventional have not differed. And you see that here in this year. And the protein levels were higher in not only the organic, but also the diversified conventional system was higher than the standard conventional system. Um, and just to run down our list here, non-essential amino acids were 19% higher in the organic manure. The essential amino acids were 25% higher in the organic manure. Um, they are also 14, almost 15% higher in the diversified conventional versus the non-conventional. And then we have a list here of different amino acids that all differed to some extent by management. And then B vitamins that were all higher in the organic system. So what this graph, the takeaway from this graph is how we manage these crops looks like it's causing differences in certain nutrients in the crop. So we're starting to see a signal that management is playing a role in nutritional quality and nutritional concentrations. I'm going to show you some things of how we start to think about how we can tease out this overall nutritional quality. So again, here's wheat nutrient in 2019. There's a specific reason why I chose these minerals. These are all minerals that have a recommended daily intake value. So they're recognized by science to say they're important for health, and this is the minimum amount you should get on a daily basis. Um, we tended to see that copper, iron, potassium, magnesium, molybdenum was a very strange one. It was super high in conventional. I went back and looked at that data. It looks like it's probably true. They're not just an outlier. But then, and phosphorus, these were all higher in the organic manure system. But B vitamins and protein were higher in the conventional. And I attribute that mostly to the fact that we're using synthetic sources of nitrogen that are readily available to the wheat during their growth, where in the organic system we use zero fertilizer. So we have no fertilizer we're putting down, but we're still getting equal yields. And the other thing is the conventional actually had higher kilocalories, so higher levels of, really carbohydrates or energy as well. And that's critical for as we're looking at nutrient density. So again, when we look at these, it's hard to say is organic more nutritious than conventional because there's some differences here. So we've started to play around with different nutrient density scores, and there's different scores that you can use. This is probably the most simplified and probably the best method for just raw crops like our vegetables and our grains. If we start to look at processed foods that have added sugars and have added oils and had multiple crops put together, then we probably need to think about a different metric. So I don't want to spend too much time here, but now we have a way to look at a nutritional quality index and rate that the entirety of the crop. So here from that same set of wheat, what we're finding is we have an NQI. This is the 13 nutrients that I just showed, and we see that there's no difference between the conventional and the organic manure, but the organic legume that had zero fertilizer. So probably something's happening there. If we added fertilizer, we would expect an increase in the nutritional value. And most of farmers, even organic farmers, are applying some fertilizer. And we're finding the same results with other different nutritional quality indexes. This calorie for nutrients actually lower is better in this case, just the way that it's calculated. One area to highlight is that this is right now we've only had B vitamins. So having a broader set of vitamins, a broader set of antioxidant compounds. One of the problems is as we add more antioxidant compounds, these are things like beta carotene, lycopene, anthocyanins, these bioactive compounds. They might not have a reference intake value. So it's hard to know. We could say that more is better, but that's um, not always true. So we really started the vegetable systems trial in 2016 to start to get, more to this answer. The farming systems trial wasn't designed to answer this question. The vegetable systems trial was. This is a 3-acre field where we have randomized and replicated plots of organic and conventional vegetable crops, all the same variety, grown relatively at the same time of year, same soil, same atmosphere. So if there's a difference, it's how we grew it and not because the soil type was different or the environmental conditions are different, which is what can be difficult if we're just pulling things off the shelf and we have an apple from New Zealand compared to an apple from Washington State. Dr. Gladys Sinati is the director of the Vegetable Systems Trial. So a lot of this work that I'm about to show is work that she's overseen and as along with partnership with some of our collaborators. But we started this in 2016. These are the crops that we're growing in the Vegetable Systems Trial. And we basically have conventional organic side by side. And then we also have a intensive tilled system using black plastic, which is the standard in the Mid-Atlantic region. And then we have a reduced till, which I'd say is still in the experimental phase right next to that. And so I just want to show you real quickly that just to show you that the organic practices are leading to improved soil health. So this field was actually one of our best fields on the entire farm. It had high soil organic matter to start. You're seeing in 2016 on the left in both conventional and organic. There was no difference when we started, and that's because when we took these samples, it was before we changed any of the management practices. It was just one standard field that had been managed the same. So that's why we see no difference in 2016. In 2022, the black plastic or heavily tilled conventional looked like there might be a decline in soil organic matter, and the reduced till organic system is having an increase in organic matter. And a 1%, just to keep this in perspective, a 1% increase, which is about what we see between the conventional black plastic and the organic reduced till, is estimated about 20 to 25,000 gallons of water per acre that soil has the ability to hold on to for crop production. And then here's Dr. Zanotti took a lot of different measurements, so there's a lot to show, but to be brief, soil protein is something that I think is critically important because it's an important nitrogen pool in the soil that becomes available to the plants over time. And we're starting to see an increase in the organic system. So this is nitrogen that can be used for the nutrition of the crop, and a decline in the conventional. So one thing to point out is that we expect this to continue this study over time, 20 years or more, and we expect that the soils will differentiate even further over time. That some soil health indicators will be declining in the conventional, and some will be increasing in the organic, and we'll be tracking nutritional concentrations throughout that time. So we can start to say more clearly whether or not these changes in soil are leading to changes in nutritional quality. And here I'm showing you some of the data real quickly. It's already been converted to the NQI. But this is after, this is 2020 to 2022. And this is after, so 2022 is after 6 years of management. And again, these are the same varieties grown side by side, higher levels of calcium, magnesium, iron, copper, vitamin B, and proteins in the organic squash compared to the conventional. And what's important is now we can create a sum of all of these because these are standardized, and we can actually do statistical analysis on the overall nutritional quality index, not just by individual nutrients, so that we can start to set because we might have some nutrients that are higher in the conventional than the organic or vice versa. But now we're starting to be able to converge on a method to be able to say, is this healthier or less healthy? And reduced tillage also looks like it might be playing some role in improving nutritional densities. What I should have said too was this NQI I would call nutritional density because we take the caloric value of the sample into account. So it's a nutritional value per kilocalories. So I would call that nutritional density, not just a concentration. So similar thing in potatoes, and Dr. Zanotti is marching through all of the crops over time to look at these changes. So I'm showing you two here, but we're seeing some similar results where there's starting to become increases in nutrients in the organic systems. And here's one as we go a little bit deeper into analysis, looking at antioxidant levels. And this is in collaboration with scientists at the USDA ARS in Winmore, Pennsylvania. And they are microbiologists. Dr. Wade Heller and Joe Carrera are microbiologists, and they have the lab with mycorrhizal fungi. So arbuscular mycorrhizal fungi form an association with the roots of plants, and they help extract nutrients as well as moisture. And we're now starting to use that to understand how mycorrhizal fungi might be impacting nutritional quality. So here's an example of Lehigh potatoes. These were developed and bred in the Lehigh Valley of Pennsylvania. So that's the standard potato grown in the area. And then Adirondack blue, which is bred to have blue. And, when you eat foods that are blue, like, eggplant and blueberries, we know that they're high in anthocyanin. And we see that certain species. So what the scientists did was they grew these in pots with species with separate mycorrhizal fungi species. The mock here, that means that there was. I don't believe that it means that there was no mycorrhizal fungi, but they were killed by heat, so there was not live mycorrhizal fungi. So this is a comparison. So if they're increased over the mock, then we see the asterisks, which indicate a significant increase in antioxidant levels in either the Lehigh or the Adirondack blue. And what we might expect is there's greater response in the Adirondack blue, and that's most likely to increased levels of anthocyanin. But this one, Agtiv, this is the only commercially available mycorrhizal fungi. So it's one that might be in potting media that you get or other fertilizers. And this actually reduced antioxidant activity in the Lehigh potato. So one of the areas of research is how do we employ or deploy these mycorrhizal fungi on the crops, but they need to be cultured, and reliably culturing them is difficult because they're obligate, meaning they need the plants to grow, and they can't just grow on a plant media. But Dr. Zanani had a separate study that I pulled from. This was in Purple Majesty. Purple Majesty was bred by Colorado State to specifically be high in anthocyanin. And in that study, she found higher total phenols, which is probably anthocyanin, in the organic, in Purple Majesty potato grown in the organic system compared to conventional. So this kind of recapitulates or supports what has been seen in the literature, that we have increased antioxidant levels um, in organic production. So that's an area where we really need to expand our area. Um, and then I just want to show this real quickly because we have a nutritional quality index. And what I'm suggesting with some other groups is that we need to go beyond just looking at nutritional quality, because we're completely ignoring the fact that there's chemicals that are on these crops that impact human health. And so that this idea of a nutritional quality needs to expand. And what I'm showing you here is a dietary risk index. And this is, actually from samples that have been collected around the country and tested by the USDA pesticide data program. And this is a publicly available database, although it's very hard to navigate. So we have colleagues who, organize this data, but it's very clear that the conventionally grown apples in this case have much higher levels of chemicals and therefore pose a much higher dietary risk. But you can see that there's a low number of organic samples. So one of the things we'll be working on is thinking about ways that we can actually increase organic samples in this database. The other thing we can determine from public databases is if we, in the United States, if we know where the crop was harvested, then we have pesticide records from that county, and we can have a relatively good estimate of the amount of chemicals that were applied on that crop. So there's also an environmental exposure. So we're thinking about broadening this nutritional quality index to what I'm calling a regenerative health index. which is more in line with health and dietary risk. And then I want to finish up talking about this compound ergothioneine. This is a compound that we've really started to dig into a little bit because we see this clear link between soil health and human health. So this is an amino acid. It's only produced by fungi or some bacteria. It's high in mushrooms, and we see it in many different plants, but the only way it can get there, as far as we know, is through taking it up from the soil. So there's an active area of research in the medical research that's showing this compound to be an antioxidant. It has anti-inflammatory properties. There's mounting evidence that it's associated with mitigating cardiovascular disease and neurodegenerative disease. So it looks like this link between soil health and human health. And our colleagues at Penn State, this was an active area in the food science and the Hershey Medical Center, an active area that they're working on. So this study that I'm showing you actually comes from Penn State's long-term tillage experiment. And what it clearly showed that as we reduce tillage in corn, soybean, and oats, so you have complete no-till on the left, chisel disc, which is a reduced tillage, and then mold borer plow, which is a more intensive tillage. And we're clearly seeing that as we increase tillage intensity, we have a reduction in ergothioneine. So there seems to be a link between tillage intensity and ergothioneine levels in crops. This is our own data, led by Dr. Das, the director of the Farming Systems Trial, where we had multiple crops over multiple years. And again, if we look at the right panel, tillage is in the reduced tillage, the RT is reduced till and the FT is full till. The reduced tillage systems, both organic and conventional, are leading to higher levels of ergothioneine. But this is especially true in the conventional system because the conventional no-till is continuous, complete no-till, and the organic no-till still has tillage to plant the cover crops and small grains. So tillage seems to play a role. Our original hypothesis was we see higher fungal biomass in the organic systems in the organic soil, so we would expect there to be higher ergothioneine levels in the organic soils, and that should lead to increased levels of ergothioneine in organic grains. So the first part of that hypothesis was true. We do see higher levels of ergothioneine in the soil, in organic soil. But when we looked at grain, that wasn't necessarily true. So in the wheat, we saw higher levels of ergothioneine in the conventional, especially the no-till conventional. And there was not a significant difference in the corn grain. So we think there's a disconnect. This disconnect is likely because of tillage and the different microbes in the soil. And we go back to our colleagues from the ARS who have started to look at this. This is in a pilot experiment, but they've also started to look in the field as well, where we have ergothioneine. There's a positive association with the percentage of colonization of the roots with mycorrhizal fungi and ergothioneine concentrations. So that also starts to tell us that mycorrhizal fungi are probably playing some role in ergothioneine, and there are fungi. So so they dug a little bit deeper, and what this is showing in both wheat and oat seed that there's can be a specific response. So in this case, we have the mock, which was our control. We have the S. callispora had increases. When inoculated with this mycorrhizal fungi, we had increases in the ergothioneine levels in both the wheat and the oat, but not with the other mycorrhizal fungi. So they did this work with a larger set of mycorrhizal fungi and a whole bunch of different crops like asparagus and beans and soybeans. And basically what we're showing is that there's a specific response by crop and species of mycorrhizal fungi. But mycorrhizal fungi are clearly playing a role in ergothioneine uptake. One of the questions we have right now is is it helping uptake ergothioneine from the soil, or is it actually synthesizing the ergothioneine and adding it to the plant? And we also have some evidence now that it looks like it might actually uh, create different antagonistic and mutualistic relationships in soil microbes. But I don't want to get too much into that. But I have just a couple slides here. This is going back to our vegetable systems trial, where we have black beans actually turn out to be very high in ergothioneine, and black beans and green beans are both the same species. So we see higher protein levels in the vegetable systems trial in both black beans and green beans in the organic. And then we look at ergothioneine. There was no difference in black beans, but higher ergothioneine levels in the organically grown green beans in the vegetable systems trial. And this
Andrew,
is, yeah, should we wrap it
can I
up?
just, yeah, please. So we have some time for the questions.
Sure, that was my last slide. I'll leave it there. And then I just want to make sure that I acknowledge both our project partners as well as our funding partners. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was lots of information to digest there. Well, really, really fascinating. Thank you. Chuck, do you want to go ahead with the questions?
Yeah, I'm trying to find. Joe, can you take the first one? I've got the participants up, but not the chat. Hold on.
Yeah, sorry.
Well, I can ask the first one. Do other countries permit the use of glyphosate?
So yes, a lot of countries do, but there's much stronger restrictions, especially in Europe. Um, I'm trying to remember. Well, Europe, it's a multiple countries, so I think it differs between countries. I don't think it's completely banned, but there's a movement towards that, but much more strongly restricted. And there's some other chemicals like the neonicotinoids that are virtually banned. And then there's other things like paraquat and several others that we're still using, pretty heavily used in the United States that are completely banned in Europe.
Okay, I can take the next one. Are there any new statistics proving that we could put these chemical companies out of business if a high enough percentage of consumers purchase exclusively organic and regenerative organic food? And then secondly, what would that percentage of consumer demand need to be?
So I'd say not that I'm aware of, but I definitely think that there is concern amongst the chemical companies that the tide is changing. We're currently at 1% of U.S. farmland that's certified organic. It's probably less than that. Um, and some countries in Europe are at 12%, maybe even 40%. There's even, I think the Philippines have even said that they want the whole country to become organic by a certain time. So I don't know what the tipping point is. We seem to think that 10% could be it, but in some of the European countries, they're over that, and you don't see an elimination of these chemical companies. But these chemical companies are global. So if they can continue to sell in China or the United States or India, they'll continue to exist and it'll be available, globally. So it has to be almost a global response before you can completely eliminate chemicals.
All right. Rodale has started other farms across the country for promoting and teaching organic methods. Are you doing research at these sites as well?
Absolutely. So our sites in Iowa, Georgia, California, and Washington State are specific towards research. And then some of our other more local sites like St. Luke's University Hospital in Easton and Cornwall Manor in Lebanon, those are more production, and as well as the original Founders Farm. So the farm that I referenced where a lot of this research activity is in Kutztown, but the original founding farm of J.I. Rodale in Emmaus is also a farm. It's more production and education. And those ones that are across the country are focused on the regionality. So what is the appropriate research that's needed in the crops within those regions?
Thank you. Joe, do I ask your
As,
question?
sure. As summer nights stay warmer, can you comment on or has Rodale studied what crops in particular are or may be affected?
Yeah, it's not something that we specifically um, work on. I mean, we recognize climate change where we are, we have a heavy focus on soil. And I mentioned that one slide in the vegetable systems trial. Some of our neighbors, the farms that are near us in our region are about 2% organic matter. Our farm is most of them are over 4% organic matter. Some of the high vegetable production areas are over 5% organic matter. So if you look at that statistic, that 1% increase in organic matter equals 20 to 25,000 gallons of water. And in some cases, we have 2 or 3 percent higher organic matter levels. So we're looking at it more like if we can manage the soil, we have higher infiltration rates. So when you have higher rainfall, higher intensity of rainfall, which we're starting to experience, then we have greater infiltration rates so we can store that water. And if we have greater soil carbon, really, then be able to hold on to that moisture. And actually, carbon holds on to moisture with less strength than soil does. So when you increase the carbon, the water is more available to the plant as well. So we're thinking about how we can improve the soil health so that we can continue to maintain or grow crops. But the other thing about it is we've always advocated for a more diverse system. So most farms in the Midwest are growing corn. Even here in the East Coast, we're growing corn with a little bit of soybeans. But if you grow corn, soybean, oats, wheat, maybe you grow hay, um, and maybe even have some other crops, then you mitigate that risk that might happen of different climate factors that occur during different times of the year.
Thank you. So the next question is, even minimal tillage in Western soils, in parentheses, Colorado, seems to negatively impact soil structure from farmers I've talked to here. Does Rodale have any research sites in drier climates?
So in in Iowa, it's slightly drier, but we've just started to do that work. California is extremely dry. So I don't know, you're relying on irrigation for most of the production. So it's probably not quite the same. And then we also have a consulting program where we're consulting in farms in those areas. Um, I think I saw Bob Quinn on here, who's from Montana, so he might have he's starting research at the Quinn Institute, but he might have a more different opinion than me. But what I would just say about that from a research perspective is that majority of research and even farm experience in a conventional setting, there's tillage in a high chemical use system in a low crop rotation without the use of organic fertilizers. When I say organic fertilizer, I mean organically based, like compost, manures, food waste, crop residues. And what we find, and we worked with the Soil Health Institute. They did a study across all of North America, so including Canada and Mexico. So it had different climates and different treatments, tillage treatments. Basically, when you just do research and you eliminate crop diversity, crop rotation, use of compost and use of cover crops and plants as a source of fertility, then tillage looks terrible. But when you incorporate all those other conservation practices in, which we're doing in most organic systems, then tillage has a negligible, in some cases, it's worse for organic carbon. And part of that is because incorporating all of that plant biomass and organic biomass into the soil with tillage actually can lead to improved soil carbon levels than just leaving it on the surface.
Right. Okay. Joe, do you want to try the next one?
Yeah, I apologize, John, if I'm getting this incorrect, but I think the question is, uh, can you define what inorganic manure is?
Right. So inorganic is basically most of our synthetic fertilizers. So things like the word organic meaning carbon based. So things like urea and ammonium nitrate and magnesium, like magnesium sulfate and all the different most of the synthetic fertilizers that are being used they're not carbon based. Most of what we're using in organic, things like compost and manures, and even the fertilizer sources we use, which might be like feather meal, blood meal, alfalfa meal, are coming with carbon as a component. And what they basically they're the nitrogen and the nutrients become available slowly over time, um, because basically the microbial activity uh, feeding on the carbon releases the nutrients, and then the nutrients become available slowly over time to the plant. So what happens is the plant can take that nutrients up when it's available. We already know that when we use synthetic fertilizers that 50% is lost. I mean, every agronomist at every major university knows that you're basically we were doubling the rate that's needed for the crop because half of 25% leaches into the groundwater and 25% evaporates as nitrous oxide or some sort of greenhouse gas. Um, and then the plant can usually take it up, but then through heavy rains, it's usually not available. Um, so anyway, so that's basically the fertilizer story of inorganic versus organic fertilizers.
Thank you. Andrew, this is an interesting question. Any concerns about microplastic entering crops from the use of black plastic coverage?
Yeah, absolutely. I think everything that may lead to nanoplastics. In California, if you go to California, and well, honestly, if you go to southern New Jersey, you can drive down across fields that are just all black plastic mulch for vegetable production. It's the same way in really everywhere there's major vegetable production, but California, we're in Ventura County, but it's large areas of California. Um, and it's really right now it doesn't look like organic necessarily uses more than conventional, but we can't use herbicides, so it is a great tool in the organic, especially for vegetable production. So that's why it's an area of research for us. It's a major area of research in our California Organic Center to use something similar to what I showed with the roll down annual like rye, and I showed the no-till system where we rolled down rye in that case. So using plant-based mulches, but what's also critical in California is you have to hold the moisture in the soil. So bare soil is very prone to loss of moisture, and we're basically paying for the irrigation water there. But yes, there's major concern that in general agriculture is contributing to those nanoplastics. And we basically see I can't say that I'm completely versed on this, but you know, carrots carrots and apples have the highest levels of nanoplastics. So we know that it's coming up through the roots. Carrots make sense. It's coming in the roots and it's right there. What's crazy about means that it's migrated through the entire vascular system of the crop into the actual fruit that you're eating. So it doesn't seem like there's a much of a barrier that the plant has to prevent it from moving within the plant.
Wow.
Jeez.
Wow. I had no idea. So an
Well,
apple that grows on a tree can have microplastics from the soil that, wow,
Yeah.
that's amazing. All
yeah,
right, the next question.
kind of scary.
Let's
Uh,
see. You got it, Joe?
yeah, just a comment, much of this excellent science studies is over my head, but I will put more organic foods into my mouth for sure. Thank you on behalf of my family and grandchildren. Please visit Rodale soon. So that's a comment. And the next question is, with the vegetable trials, is there a possibility of cross-contamination or commingling of the organic and chemical-intensive conventional farm produce? And what mitigation or protective practices were used?
So in the farming systems trial with the grain, there's a 5 foot barrier between the plots. And that's not enough, at least not from a legal standpoint, to sell those crops as organic. So everything in that field gets sold as conventional grain. But like I showed, we have water catchment devices underneath some of the crops, and we only spray early in the morning when there's virtually no wind, and it's directed straight down. So we feel pretty confident that there's not major drift. In the vegetable systems trial, we have, I believe it's a 35-foot barrier between the organic and the conventional. That's enough based from our certification. So the the organic plots are actually certified organic, and the conventional plots are not organic because there's much more labor intensity in growing vegetables. We want to be able to sell those or use those as organic. Um, and we did not use neonicotinoids in the vegetable systems trial. When we went and visited farms in the area, almost every single one of them was spraying neonicotinoids on for insects. But we didn't use it because we have studies that show that it can migrate 300 feet or more, and that means we'd be contaminating other parts of our farm that is certified organic. So to some extent, we're under applying chemicals in the conventional system, compared to what's probably typical.
Okay. How much of the dangerous chemicals in vegetables can be removed by washing and how much can't?
I can't say I'm an expert on that, but the data I showed on those apples, I mean, those aren't, apples that are in this, these are apples coming at the store, and most apples are going to go through a washing system at the farm level before they get packed and sent.
Mhm.
Um, but some of the problem can also be that they're then coated with kind of like a plastic wax to help them store, uh, and um, those can have chemicals. But I'll tell you a story. I was buying bins. So I was a full-time vegetable farmer for about 10 years. I was buying bins and they were from Washington State, and we said, why did these are interesting bins. We've never seen like this before. We wanted them all flat so when we put tomatoes down, they didn't like get bruised and things. And they said, oh, these are fungicide bins. So these are made so you put all your fruit in and it goes on the belt. And as it goes down the belt, the fungicides are sprayed. So that and when they go down the belt, they're sprayed, and then you put them in the clamshell box, and they're sprayed with a fungicide just before they're put in that clamshell, so they have their self shelf life is longer. So when I hear
Oh,
people tell me, "Oh, I don't buy those stupid organic strawberries because they always go bad so much faster," it's because they didn't get a fungicide application minutes before being packed. And so that's really what's happening. And when you look at some of the pesticide residue data, like I showed that the apple, the some of the majority of the pesticide residue that is on organic samples at the grocery store is because they're being packed in a facility that packs both conventional and organic.
jeez.
So they pack the conventional, but then they clean out the system and then pack the organic, and there's still some of those residues there.
interesting. Interesting.
Very. Seems the best argument will be centered on the risks of pesticides and herbicides in our food and our general environment. Nutrition is important, but would but I would think it is doubtful this will move the country to improve our agriculture practices. Thoughts on that?
Well, yeah, you're right. I mean, what you're partly saying is that, will consumers push for a demand for more organic? What we're seeing is that the growth in organic, I just was told today, based on long-term, this is an organization that's basically taking all the data from grocery stores. In the past year, we had a 10%, 8 to 10% increase in growth in the organic industry, in organic sales. So double-digit growth year over year in the organic industry. We've seen that for, multiple couple decades now since we started. So there's tremendous growth. Um, but farmers aren't adopting or aren't transitioning to organic fast enough. So that's what's really leading to this high price of organic, although in some cases it's not so high. But So farmers are not transitioning to organic as fast as consumers are demanding it. But at some point, there's got to be a significant change if consumers are demanding it. And I will say, as we look at farms, there's the two most significant factors I see is age. So you see the younger generation is starting to take over farms. They're much more receptive to organic, and women who are now have a greater control over land and farms than they did previously are even more receptive to organic. So there was a survey of farmers that said, do you have control over the farm and farm decisions?" And so these are all people that had said, "Yes, I have control over my farm." 100% of the female participants in that survey said that environment and human health factors play a role in their management decisions. 100% of the men said economics plays the biggest role in their management decisions. And about 50% said that environment and human health play any role in their decisions. So that just tells me that as we see a greater proportion of farmers that are young and women, there's a likelihood that we'll see an increase in organic production.
Andrew, we have a lot more questions than we can answer at this point in time. I would like
I'm
to
happy to
ask,
stick on for a little bit, but I understand.
so there is one here that's really kind of at the heart of how people behave. So does washing exterior of fruits and vegetables remove the pesticides, or are they internal to the fruit and vegetable?
That's a question that Dr. Zanotti is trying to get at. Um, it depends on the crop, we know. So we know that squash, things in the squash family, like cucumbers and butternut squash and pumpkins and things of that nature, they've actually been used as bioremediation tools because they readily take up toxins. And I saw a study where they used different crops, but they were the highest levels of kind of remediating the toxins. So I think it has to do with the the crop.
Okay.
Um, and then I'll just say one just along with that with something like wheat. Reason that we've seen such high glyphosate levels in wheat is because we're using it as a desiccant, and farmers are spraying it just before they harvest. And that's partly because they want to be able to harvest early. And then for things like potatoes, we're using things like sprout inhibitors. So we're spraying things that they'll stay on your shelf without sprouting. So you might see organic potatoes if you put them on your shelf long enough, they'll start to have sprouts. That's because those chemicals aren't on there. So it's
Okay.
separate from the question, but related.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm gonna ask Phil. We have about six more questions. Should we continue, Phil, or?
Yeah, let's give it 5 more minutes and then we can
Okay.
try to wrap up.
Okay. Can you briefly explain the process where those green tomatoes from Florida are picked and then gassed to ripen, then brought to market in the Northeast? Is that gassing a concern? Does it take away from the nutritional value of the tomato?
The gas is not concerned. It's ethylene. Ethylene is a natural, all plants, all vegetables that ripen. The reason they ripen is because you have increases of ethylene in the plant, which cause ripening. Um, so that's natural. Um, but I think from a nutritional quality perspective, the two things to consider are you're not breeding for nutrition. Part of the reason why they're picked that way, they're hard. So they literally you can put them into like a 20-gallon bin like we do with apples and lift them up and dump them into a big bin like that and they don't get bruised. And then you can gas them and and then they become ripe. But then you notice like when you buy if you're here in the Northeast and you buy tomatoes in January, they're like hard, they're not as red where why I this is where I would advocate for local production. If you're going, I mean, if you're in Pennsylvania right now and you're not buying a local tomato, you're missing out. I mean, the farmers are throwing them out. And if you're growing them and you're buying them locally, you don't wear it. You're not concerned about whether they're good a month from now. So there, and then you maybe even get heirloom varieties that have improved taste. Well, those are going to have a much higher nutritional value. And there is some thought that allowing the tomato in this case to ripen on the vine does increase the nutritional value, especially those antioxidant or those bioactive compounds.
Okay. Joe?
How can they get an organic certification if they're packaged where fungicides are used?
So that I was referring to typical fruit, but that's not allowed. So that's why I was saying or conventional strawberries are likely getting a fungicide sprayed. Organic strawberries are not getting the fungicide sprayed. Um, so if you have organic strawberries, berries, fruit, there should not have been fungicides sprayed directly on them, um, especially during packaging. I mean, there are fungicides that are organic, like sulfur and copper, that can be used in the production, sprayed on the plants, but not synthetic fungicides that are applied during packing.
So Tom Wilson has two questions here. Are there proven health benefits from ergothioneine? That's one question. The other is, do molds, fungi tend to build up in your soils and crops that have been no-till, reduced-tilled for years?
So the answer to the first question emphatically is yes. And the medical evidence that ergothioneine has health benefits continues to grow almost weekly. Um, and it looks like it's broad. It has broad protective. Um, you know, people that had higher levels of ergothioneine in their blood had lower incidence of COVID. And then we see neurodegenerative disease, we see uh, heart rate, we see even eyes and vision improved with higher levels of ergothioneine. So it seems to be broad. So that's a yes. I think the question about, does reducing tillage, so the things that are increasing fungi, maybe, and you might put molds in that category, um, tend to be increased plant matter, um, increased compost or manure, or like we said, organic matter. And largely that's because those fungi can feed on on those um, materials and grow, and that's why you have higher fungi. But when you till the soil, while you might be incorporating those things, you also are adding oxygen and making uh, nutrients more readily available, which actually tends to increase the bacterial levels. And when that bacteria increases, you tend to see I won't say a decline in fungi, but a change in the bacteria fungi ratio.
Okay.
Um, so there's a lot of thoughts about how the benefits of the bacteria fungi ratio.
Okay. I think we'll have to stop here. There are a couple more questions, but there's also a person that wants to know that this will be recorded. It has been recorded, and the slides will be part of the recording. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Phil and give you a huge thank you, Andrew, for all the information that you've provided. I have 4 pages of 8.5 by 11 paper with notes on it. So extremely informative seminar, and I'll turn the floor back over to Phil.
Charles and Phil, can I answer one question that I see before we go?
Mhm.
Sure.
Are efforts being made by U.S. federal agents to limit the toxic chemicals being applied during the various stages of the food production cycle? The answer to that is no. And as a matter of fact, currently, as we speak, the federal government is trying to reverse some chemicals that were on the list to be delisted and eliminated, and trying to keep them from being eliminated. One of those, chlorpyrifos, which was listed under the Obama administration to be removed, is a known neurodegenerative, or it's known to have neurodegenerative risk to children. So currently, I'd say there's efforts being made to reduce the safety of our food.
Wow. That's sobering. Well, hopefully we'll survive this and start moving forward again, at least. And also thanks to all the work you're doing, help get this information out, and people can start to change course. But we thank you so much for sharing all this information with us. And thanks everybody for your questions. And we're looking forward to seeing you next month on September 30th when we talk about large-scale solar farms. So we'll look forward to seeing you then. And with that, everyone, have a good night. And thank you so much, Dr. Smith.